Yeah, no, Pierce, I agree with you. Facts matter. And I want to start by addressing an uncomfortable truth. Any ceasefire deal, since we're talking about a ceasefire, that leaves the illegal blockade and occupation of Palestine intact is going to be, by definition, temporary. You can describe it as a band-aid on a wound that requires surgery without addressing the root causes of the violence, the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, the illegal occupation of Palestinian land. This cycle will continue.
Piers Morgan just hosted an insane panel just after the announcement of the ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel, in which we have Jonathan Conricus, a former IDF spokesperson, and Ahmed El Din, a Kuwaiti journalist and media personality of Palestinian descent. This is one of those clips that you truly have to sit down and watch, because trust me, this one's got it all. So without spoiling anything, let's get into it, check out these arguments, and of course give you my unfiltered take.
And I think we're here to talk about a ceasefire and whether that will lead to peace, as Jonathan talked about, because we've all seen the harrowing images coming out of Gaza. Pierce, I know you've seen them because you share them on your social media.
They're horrific.
They're heartbreaking.
Yes.
They're relentless. And frankly, they're a moral test for all of us, including Jonathan. How can we, as human beings, witness what we've witnessed and not only be overwhelmed by helplessness, but not confront the mechanisms that enable this impunity? That's where we have to start. And the ceasefire...
Well, actually, okay, let me stop you there, because I think this is important to clarify where I come from on this, okay?
Sure,
Which is, I don't have a side, despite what both sides keep telling me, because both sides think I'm in the camp for the other side. I've always tried to be fair. But you see, it's interesting when I hear you, because you basically start in your thinking, in the way you're speaking publicly, from Israel's response onwards. And I prefer to start from this whole thing in totality, going back to October the 7th and the heinous attack on Israel.
It's totality October
I'm not
the 7th.
talking to you.
Yeah, but I am talking.
Well, I'm talking
and I'm
to
letting you
Ahmed.
know that it didn't start on October the 7th.
No, there's obviously...
And if you want to take it in your
no,
totality...
I'm talking to Ahmed, if you don't mind. To show some respect for your fellow panellists,
No,
please.
I do mind. If you want to start from the beginning, let's start from 1948.
Yes, I'm about to say that. If you let me just finish what I'm saying...
Well...
Alright, I do have to jump in here. One thing is 1000% sure. This isn't a last week problem, right? Piers saying starting from the beginning and then saying October the 7th is a false statement, because that is nowhere near the beginning. In fact, a lot of what we've seen in this recent times is maybe not arguably even worse than what we've seen in the past, totaling the entire history of this conflict. So trying to say starting from the beginning and then saying October 7th, I don't necessarily agree with. In fact, this is a problem that I consistently see in just ignoring the actual long history of this conflict and not even fully understanding and trying to argue the conflict that we're seeing here. It's like trying to explain the ending of a movie without ever watching the first half. It doesn't make sense. This conflict was built brick by brick, policy by policy, and ignoring that context is exactly why we're still stuck in this same mess.
Obviously, I know there is 75 years of history to this conflict. Obviously, I'm aware passions on both sides run very high. Obviously, I'm aware, Ahmed, from everyone I've talked to on both sides, and I would say my show has platformed more people, by the way, from the Palestinian side than any other show in the world. So when people on the Palestinian side say to me, you're so biased, I say, really? Because I could rattle off a lot of names of people who've not been allowed a space anywhere else, right?
I'll be very honest, I will give Piers some credit. He certainly is one of the media outlets that has definitely allowed for actual conversations to happen. But I don't necessarily agree with his take that he's been completely unbiased, right? Especially looking back at a bunch of the older Piers Morgan clips or even some of the videos that we've posted, he very certainly leaned to one side. But I will again give him credit. It seems like recently he has been at least a lot more open to hearing out the Palestinian side, almost to the point where I might even call it actual change in Piers' perspective. It seems like all this talking and actual foresight from either side, especially the Palestinian side, has opened up some insight onto Piers' side. But I definitely wouldn't say he's been completely unbiased, as a lot of the older clips he clearly leaned to one side. But hey, as long as he's actually still willing to open up conversation, that's definitely far better than a lot of these media outlets that exist.
And Jonathan, I know you know that because you've been up
Yes.
against them, right? So my
I know
point is
that
this.
because I've seen the amount of vile anti-Semitism that has been platformed here, the amount of lies and utter nonsense, including by the two previous speakers,
Yes,
accusing Israel of genocide and things that are
lies. Imagine
fantastic
Amnesty
and
International out here lying.
completely
The Lemkin
false.
Institute
Okay, don't talk over each
completely
other. Okay,
false.
listen.
Listen,
lying. I mean,
okay,
Let me go back to
Miriam,
Ahmed.
I didn't
I'm
interrupt
talking to Ahmed. Let me just talk to Ahmed. Here's my
Yeah,
point.
I'd just like to have a
let me finish my
conversation, guys.
Ahmed, let me
Have a
finish my point.
conversation.
Don't all talk over each other. Let me finish. Let's try and keep some order here. We get a better debate for the viewers. So my point is, I go back to October the 7th for the purposes of this particular war, this particular phase of the whole conflict, okay? And so when I hear people who only start about their horror about Israel's response, I say, well, hang on a second. You actually need to start with the utter horror of October the 7th, which precipitated this extraordinary response from Israel, which in my opinion, for the record, I think has now gone way too far. And I've always asked during this, what is proportionate? I do not believe what has been happening in the last few months is proportionate. And I think that's why this has to end. So my point, though, Ahmed, is that I don't think you can talk about Israel's response in isolation and not record the fact that on October the 7th, 7,000 people were wounded or killed and over 250 were kidnapped. So I just want to put it in totality because I think as we reach a point of potential ceasefire or some kind of agreement, it's the only way to be fair about this.
Sure. But because we want to be fair, I think it would be an insult to our collective intelligence and to our collective humanity to suggest that nothing before October 7th can justify October 7th, but October 7th itself can somehow justify the horrific violation of moral and legal norms.
Well,
I
agree. Listen, with the premise of what you've just
can
said.
I finish my thought?
Yeah, but I'm just saying I agree with you about that point, right? So I agree that nothing that happened on October the 7th to me now justifies the scale of what has happened now since, right?
Fair enough.
I agree with you.
And Pierce, the point that I need to make and that I was going on to make, so I appreciate you interjecting, but please just let me get to the point.
Sure.
Because what's disturbing to me, Pierce, is, as you know, Palestinian suffering did not start on October 7th. It did not start last year. As you mentioned, it's been decades of ethnic cleansing. And, you know, Jonathan called me a liar, even though I've barely spoken on this program. I don't think I've shared any lies. But one thing I want to say about Palestinian suffering is, even in the context of an unfolding genocide, the scale of which you described, the conversation is immediately derailed. It's redirected to condemnations of Hamas or abuses in other nations, as if one injustice nullifies another. Francesca Albanese on your show made it clear that one war crime, according to international law, does not justify another.
Man, this guy is thorough and I love it. He's pointing out how the focus always gets shifted away from the real issue. Bring up the suffering in Gaza, boom, people immediately pivot to, but Hamas, or start pointing fingers at other countries. It's a classic dodge. And he's making it clear that one injustice does not cancel out another. Imagine someone saying, hey, I stole your wallet, but your neighbor stole your car, so it's fine. Does that logic hold up? Of course not. It's just simply about keeping the focus where it belongs and stop using excuses to justify atrocities. I mean, I agree with that. I'm not sure if you guys do. You can let me know in the comments.
And yet, here we are watching Israel commit war crime after war crime every single day. And let's just be clear. When it comes to the ceasefire, to bring it back to the point of this show, the delay in the deal wasn't about negotiations or Hamas, as the media has repeatedly claimed. It was about putting profit over people, appeasing Israel's far-right government. And even now, as the deal is edging closer, we still hear from extremists in the Israeli government, like Smotrich, calling it a catastrophe and openly advocating for the continued not only occupation of Palestinian people on land, but for cleansing, that's his word, Gaza. That is, if you look at, Pierce, the objectives that Netanyahu stated, we see now U.S. intelligence reports that Hamas has recruited at least as many new fighters as Israel claims.
Yeah, I find that very disturbing. I agree.
Yeah, and this is because this is not a war in the traditional sense. Gaza has been reduced to a death camp. Now, that might sound like hyperbole to Jonathan or anyone else, but the reality is being documented, and the evidence is all over the platform X, and it's all over alternative and independent media. And so the stark reality is that we are witnessing a chilling reminder that history repeats itself.
Man, I'm a major fan of the way Ahmed speaks and also just puts together arguments. He just makes it super logical, simple, and makes it make sense, which is exactly what you need. And the point that he just made is probably the one that I agree with the most. Calling Gaza a death camp might sound extreme to some, but look at the numbers, look at the footage, look at the evidence. Entire neighborhoods flattened, people trapped with no way out, and not to mention the insanity of the number of people who have died, and not just any people, women, children, just innocent people. To be honest, his statement is not a hyperbole, it's reality. And furthermore, him saying history repeats itself is also just honestly a completely true statement. How many times do we have to say never again before we actually mean it? These points are uncomfortable. Ahmed, I can guarantee you, is making some people uncomfortable. To be honest, that's exactly what we need, because this is not something we should be comfortable with.
Despite the carnage, Israel's strategy seems to be fueling resistance, not extinguishing it. They're not eradicating Hamas. Israeli security officials themselves, and Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong or lying, they admit that Hamas fighters have only been reduced from 25,000 to 19,000. I'm citing US intelligence as well, which reminds us
No.
what we already know, which is, let me just finish. You said you weren't going to interrupt.
Yeah,
Jonathan, at the beginning, you said you weren't going to interrupt. I'm almost done.
No, you invited me to correct you, so I'm happy to do that.
Faster than it can be crushed. You can correct me when I'm done. So what has Israel gained? I'll ask you, Jonathan.
Well,
you've
been speaking for like 20 minutes.
Hamas hasn't been defeated. In fact, it has.
Okay, well, to be fair to Jonathan, Ahmed, you can't keep asking him questions, and when he tries to reply, you say you haven't finished. So.
What has Israel accomplished? My question to Jonathan Pierce, I appreciate that. Netanyahu's real objective has not been accomplished. His stated objective has not been accomplished. And you and I both know, Pierce, and Jonathan does as well, as does everybody on this panel, and I'd love to hear from the remaining guest after Jonathan, that the Biden administration knew the terms of this deal back when they proposed it. A deal that Biden allowed Netanyahu to torch while fueling Israel's genocide.
All right, all right, listen, I'm going to bring, I'm going to let Jonathan respond to you because you asked direct questions. Batty, if you just hold fire, we'll come to you, I promise you. We've got Dan Crenshaw waiting as well. I'm going to go to him and then I'm going to get Batty to respond. Yeah, I'll get you to respond better to what Dan Crenshaw says in a moment. But Jonathan, first of all, your response to what Ahmed said there about this apparent reality which the Americans are putting out there, which is that Hamas, far from being defeated, actually almost every Hamas terrorist who's been killed has now been replaced. I mean, what is your response to that?
Well, Ahmed just asked the ultimate question. After all of the destruction, all of the suffering, what has actually been achieved? Hamas isn't gone, and the cycle of violence is still spinning. It's like spending millions on pest control only to find the infestation worse than it was before. So what's the plan? Keep doubling down until there's quite literally nothing left? I mean, that's the question Ahmed's asking. The strategy evidently isn't working, and pretending it is only prolongs the suffering. To be honest, my take is that this was never the true intention to begin with. Because again, this is not a conflict that has existed for the past year. This is a 75-year conflict. One that we've had the same arguments made, same attempts made, and the same conflict continuing. But I guess let's go ahead and hear Jonathan's response.
Yeah, so there were a few things that I actually could agree with the previous speaker, with Ahmed, in the fact that Hamas has not yet been defeated. And I said so, I admitted so myself, and I think that's why Israel has not yet achieved its strategic goals. It has not yet safeguarded southern Israel, and Gaza will continue to be in misery because Hamas still governs. Now, a very important detail that was omitted, I suppose not by mistake, is how is Hamas recruiting and what enables them to recruit. They're recruiting 15, 16, 17, and 18-year-old boys, and they're doing so by coercion and conditioning the supply of food, of humanitarian aid that Israel is allowing to get into the Gaza Strip, that is paid for by many parts of the international community. And Hamas, you're interrupting me, and that's not okay. I didn't interrupt you.
Oh, I will
gladly interrupt using that in order to. Of course you will. You can call me names, but that doesn't justify anything.
You are defending genocide, sir, and you belong in The Hague, not on a panel.
No, I belong in my free homeland, which is where I am and will continue to be.
And
you can continue to spew violence and hatred on Al Jazeera
Imagine the
and promotes
International Criminal
terrorism,
Court
and you
coming
will,
after you.
You know what? You know what?
you will
You
be
have
held
done.
accountable
Miriam,
for
here's the
your
thing.
deeds.
All
Miriam,
you
if
have
you're
to do
will be
right,
accountable
if you're
for
right,
your
Miriam,
deeds.
that the time for that to happen will
Yeah,
come, right? And if you're
absolutely.
wrong, then you're actually slurring Jonathan in a way that I think is unfair for this particular panel right
Well,
now.
I'm
You have no evidence that he supported any
Which
genocide.
is all you've been
He's
doing,
literally
Miriam.
been
It's
sitting here
all
the
about
entire time
personal
defending
attacks,
it.
trying to paint me as something that I am,
I
know you're
that
the
I'm not,
victim,
and you
Jonathan.
All right,
don't
you know what?
even have the
You know what?
facts
If
straight.
everyone,
You're the
so
victim.
just to be clear, if everyone talks after each other, no one at home can ever understand anything anyone's saying.
So I'll just finish my point here.
No.
Piers,
You don't
let
all
me-
then just
let me
immediately
just
start
finish the
talking again.
point
No,
then.
time out.
Well, from here, the panel just goes into a frenzy, so it's not really worth continuing. So that's more or less where we'll end it off, folks. Ahmed El Din didn't just bring the receipts, he brought the whole filing cabinet. You can love him or hate him, but he's asking the questions that even a biased person hopefully should want to understand and want to ask. But as always, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. It doesn't matter what these people think. It doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what the people think. So let me know down in the comments below your thoughts on the points made within this video. If you agree with me, disagree with me, whatever it may be, let me know in the comments. Be sure to give us a like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one.